So now we're at the end of creating our Hacker Next app, and it's time to deploy. So we're going to deploy this since we've added a custom server setup, and you can just grab the final code from the end of this section if you want to include all of the optional stuff that we did with service workers and the manifest.json file and converting it to a progressive web app. We're going to go through the process of deploying it as a Node app, which will be significantly easier than creating it as a static site. So again, if you added all of that custom server setup, we want the start to be node server.js to run our server file. We're setting node env to production since we're in a production environment. So this start script will be run when we deploy our app. Before that, we'll run our build script. Once again, we can add our deploy script as now with the public flag. So I believe if you haven't added the progressive web app stuff, you could just have dev set to next, start set to next start, and then deploy it in the same fashion we're going to be deploying it right now, but I haven't tested that out. Like I said, you can grab the code attached to this lecture in order to grab all that stuff without having to watch those two videos. And not only are we going to deploy our app, but we're also going to do a Lighthouse audit, a performance audit, to see how well it stacks up with the Hacker News site itself. So the last thing we'll change is in manifest.json. We just want to add a background color, background_color, and we're going to set that to the hex code F0F. So with all that, we can save. We'll first run our build script with npm run build. Then we're going to run our deploy script. So it's going to use Node to deploy it. It's given us the URL that it's deployed to. Then it'll go through the process of installing our dependencies with npm install. It'll then start up our server. We can see listening on port 3000. You see our log. So it's running our start script. And finally, it'll be deployed. So again, the URL is copied to our clipboard. We'll open a new tab. So our app started up successfully. We're loading all of the stories. And we can go to other pages. We look at the comments section. We look at the comments for a given story. We're able to load all of them very quickly, by the way. So our app's working well. Now let's do an audit on it. If you're using Chrome, you're able to go to the audits area, and performing a Lighthouse audit is a place where you can find common problems with your app and find ways to improve performance. Now you can choose what device you want to perform an audit on. We'll do mobile, since we want this to be running well on a mobile device. And we can perform the type of audits that we want. We can audit based on performance as a progressive web app, based on best practices, accessibility, and SEO. We can choose the throttling that we want for our network when it's doing the audit. So we'll click on Run Audits to test it out as a mobile app. And we see how the site looks in a mobile view, which is pretty neat. So very nice. Looks like we got a perfect score for performance, progressive web app, accessibility, best practices, SEO. And all of these different tests are done based on a number of metrics. For example, for performance, it's how quickly can we get the first text or image on the page, time to interactive, when our user can first interact with our page. There's a bunch of other criteria. For progressive web app, we ensured mainly that it registers a service worker and that it has a manifest.json file. It has a web app manifest. It's not included here in the past audits, but we will get a lower score if we don't have a manifest file. For accessibility, we can see all of the audits that we passed, as well as for best practices and SEO. And it's worth taking a look at these other areas where it says additional items to manually check. So things that the test can't cover, but are useful to take a look at. So we can see how performant our app ended up being, especially when we made it as a progressive web app, but also how well Next sets us up for performance as well as accessibility and SEO. And just to do a kind of fun comparison, we're going to go to Y Combinator News, or the original Hacker News. Well, hold on. Let me see if I can. Let's just type in Hacker News. news.ycombinator.com. And if we do a audit on it, we just do it by the same criteria. You can see that we get a little bit different outcome. So of course there's a lot more implemented in the normal Hacker News site, such as authentication, a lot more information. But we did pretty well for our little site. And finally, one last thing to note: if you're interested in removing a deployment, say you're getting an error that you have too many deployments, you can just run the remove command, now rm, and then give it the name of your deployment, just the beginning, not the unique string at the end. Remove hacker next. It'll fetch your deployments, and then it'll ask you if you want to remove it.